Welcome back to the WKJS podcast. Today is part 2 of our panelist discussion about Morgan Philpot's polygamy seminar. And our panelists are Jeremy Hoop from the Still Mormon podcast, Whitney Horning, author of 2 books, Joseph Smith Revealed and Hiram Smith, A Prophet Unsung, and Michelle Stone from the 132 Problems podcast. Now, the first part, we discussed the first 5 claims that Morgan makes in his polygamy seminar, and today we'll be going through the second 5 claims that he makes. And the question really is the LDS Church practicing polygamy today? Since the manifesto, supposedly they're not. They no longer practice polygamy, yet they still allow men to be sealed to multiple wives. So how do you determine that? Well, if a man is sealed to one wife and she passes away and he marries a second wife, he's allowed to go ahead and be sealed to her as well, which is insinuating they will live polygamy in the next life. So on one hand, the church is saying polygamy is not required for the celestial kingdom or for exaltation. But on the other hand, they're still sealing multiple women to men. They're practicing polygamy today by doing that. So how do they get that authority? Who tells them that they can have this second wife or that they can be polygamists in the next life? One good example is Dallin Oaks. So when he was 66 years old, his first wife passed away, and he decided a few years later to get a second wife and to be sealed to her as well. And he talks about in his book, Life Lessons Learned, how he came up with that decision. I was expecting some sort of, revelation from God that says you need to be a polygamist. But you can tell for yourself if you think that's the case or not. He says, I will mention only a few considerations that influenced my decision, some in the realm of reason and some in the realm of revelation. So his reason for taking this second polygamous wife was partially how he chose her was through his own reasoning and partially from revelation. He continues, Kristen's many years of being single, her service as a missionary in Japan, which these are him reasoning it through. And I thought it was very interesting that her being single and never having been married before was a part of his reasoning. Anyway, also her doctrinal degree from Brigham Young University in education, her intelligence, her faithfulness, her skills as a speaker and teacher, her loving outreach to others ideally fitted her for the responsibilities that came to her with our marriage. So she sounds like an incredible lady. And him being an apostle, he took that into consideration and saw that she was a good fit. All of that stuff makes sense. But here is the revelatory part of his decision. In the way I was led to meet her in answer to my prayers for guidance, and in the sacred assurance I received of June, that's his first wife's approval, I had the revelatory confirmation I sought. So basically, he asked God for help to find his second wife, and the way that he was led to meet her made him, I guess, assume that God approved of their getting together. Where's the answer from God? And next he says, in the sacred assurance I received of June's approval. So I know that before she passed, in his book, he says that she wanted him to get married again and thought that would be good for him. But this makes me feel like he got some sort of answer from her from the other side of the veil. So that's his answer. That's where his authority to live polygamy comes from. It's not necessary, but God commanded him because he asked for guidance and found his second wife and was like, well, then that's God guiding me and telling me that this is okay. And then his wife telling him from the other side of the veil. I just don't consider that the authority a person would need. And I know if you're LDS, you're like, well, given that he's an apostle, prophet, and seer, he can do what he wants. That's the answer that he got. But this same thing applies to every man that's LDS who's sealed to his wife that passes away, and then he gets sealed to another wife. Who's telling them that that's okay? How do they know that that's God's will? Why would they be a polygamist if they're not commanded to be polygamists? So I want to talk about that more today, and we'll do that as we talk through these second 5 claims that Morgan has made. Thanks for joining us today. Okay, so claim number 6 is not actually from Morgan. It's from one of the participants from his seminar. And they're reasoning through this same question. Why would a man, if you're not required to be a polygamist, why would you ever choose to be a polygamist? And his reason that many of them say is there are more righteous women than men. So if you go into the celestial kingdom and there's way more women than men, how could the women ever advance to exaltation if marriage is required unless you did polygamy? So let's listen to the panelists' response to that.
But he just answered the whole thing in our little discussion before by saying, trying to find a righteous man is trying to find a valuable land. It's trying to find gold or something like that, right? So if there's that many righteous women, I mean, in eternities. Yeah.
Okay,
I know.
look at the consequences.
I know. My wife hates it.
Look at the consequences.
So this is a guy in the audience, and he's the one that says there are more righteous women than men, as a hey, buttering her up, right? Hey, you're so great, you're awesome. And what does the wife do? She's like, I'm not buying that. And then he says, oh, my wife hates this. He did exactly what Morgan did.
He's following the lead.
This is what Morgan does. By continuing to say this and use these strategies, he teaches all of the guys, this is how to talk your wife into this. Say these things. So
It's this condescending flattery. You're so righteous, you get to be in a harem. One thing that is painfully obvious is that the people listening to him do not know the scriptures. We missed an earlier clip when he said something about 132 and she was like, is that polygamy? You know, like they're just not familiar with the scriptures. So I want to just quote the verse I think the guy was going for when he said, who can find a righteous man? And it's Proverbs 31:10. Who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is above rubies. And it goes on about how rare a virtuous woman is in this estimation. So it's really interesting to completely invert that. I don't know if there is another scripture that says who can find a virtuous man or a righteous man because he's more rare than gold or whatever it was he said. I think he's going for this. And I think that's how ignorant they are of scripture.
The opposite.
Exactly. It's a virtuous woman that is hard to find. As they claim, right? This is so demeaning to men and to women. Men are just all addicted to porn and none of them are worthy and none of that, right? That's what we're doing. That's what we are saying. Men are just worthless, except for me. I'm the righteous one. Me, I'm the big guy, right? It's like when people use Isaiah 4:1 to claim that seven women will take hold of one man. And if they want to take it literally, which is a mistake, and if they want to detach it from chapter 3, which is where it should be, which is where Joseph Smith put it in the translation, at the end of chapter 3, all of the men were killed in the war. Oh, except for me. I'm the survivor, right? So it's like this horrible, again, denying Christ, denying the atonement, denying progression, built in shame and judgment and pride and arrogance and self-righteousness of this hierarchy that is just unforgivable. So anyway, and the one point I wanted to make also is like the way to defend yourself against this is to know the scriptures. Right. The people who will not be deceived are those who can take the Holy Spirit as their guide and who know the scriptures. It's really important.
Whitney, how do you respond to the idea that population-wise, there's way more righteous women and very few men? That's an excuse for why we have to do polygamy.
I did a Google search on censuses in 1850 Utah. Amazing. There was actually more men than women.
Is that right?
There were. And typically the West was settled by more men. Men were a little more adventurous. Women tended to stay home. But so that wasn't even true. So just the idea that there was just women, whether they were righteous or not, there were not more women than men.
And we have quotes from early Utah about how scarce. The average age of marriage got down to, I know it was 16 and it might have gotten below that. They were marrying every 13-year-old within eyesight during this Reformation, right? And can I point out one more thing, because that's the temporal on this earth. What do we believe happens to babies who die before the age of accountability?
You're saved in the celestial kingdom.
Right? Qualify for all of the blessings, right? Is everyone aware that the birth rate skews slightly male, about 51% male, 49% women, female, because boys have a higher mortality rate. More baby boys die. So what will the dynamics of the celestial kingdom be?
Right.
How many young men died in war? How many baby boys were killed? I mean, died out of infant mortality. If you look at the entire, boys and men are the ones who are killed more often. And if you look even at the mortality, at the birth rate, there are going to be millions and millions of more males in the celestial kingdom.
Haven't you heard that thing about
in the afterlife?
Well, they'll go right to the celestial kingdom.
Haven't you heard the
Infant
sons
babies.
of perdition? He took a third. They were all sons, and that's why there's so many more women.
Oh.
Yeah,
But how
heard
do you
that.
explain the birth rate on Earth?
So that's exactly right. You go look at the birth rate on there. If a third, that means 20%, it should be 20% male, 50% women. It should be way more women than men, and it doesn't even come
Right.
close to that.
This is
ever.
a little side note, but it's a third part, which I don't think tells us a percentage. I think it tells us a category.
I
No,
think
I
it tells us
agree with
there are
that.
three
I've just
categories.
heard the, well,
Right.
you have to do polygamy because the third of men are going. I've heard that
That's
excuse many times.
Well, and it's just as silly as why are there different races on the earth? Because we all have different heavenly mothers. And why is there a solar system? Because we have one earth and one sun. And people come up with all kinds of, look at lions, right? We have the pride. They come up with all of these ludicrous things. Well, why don't we look at tarantulas where the female eats the male after, right? We have our whole animal kingdom to choose from, and are we supposed to be comparing ourselves to animals?
Right.
I don't believe Emma and Joseph believed that women were more righteous than men. The entire reason they set up the Relief Society, besides administering relief to the poor, was to teach virtuous principles to the sisters who were being duped by these crazy men in
to
Nauvoo.
strengthen
it's
the
happening
morals
right
of
here.
the sisters.
Yes.
And Emma often challenged the women to go teach their daughters.
They knew they were susceptible to false teachings, false doctrine, and really awful behavior. The women who came to the Nauvoo High Council in 1842 had testified against John Bennett and Francis Higbee, Chauncey Higbee, and others, and it was a total of nine men. Catherine Fuller had slept with 6 men. She'd slept with John Bennett, and she names the men and the number of times she'd been with them because she figured they're teaching me something's true, and so I guess it's okay.
You can hear it happening in this very meeting. The exact same thing, the vulnerability of lack of knowledge. And that is exactly what they were trying to combat. And I think that's exactly what we're trying to combat here.
And that's exactly what Joseph, in one of his sermons to the Relief Society, he told the sisters, he said, learn your scriptures, learn the commandments of God so you can stand up against anyone. And then he lists them: prophet, seer, revelator, apostle, bishop, mayor.
Prophet.
He goes through all these. He says, if anyone like this comes and preaches something against the commandments of God, kick them out of your house.
And he also says in another sermon, it's probably one of the greatest sermons he ever delivered, he said, if you sisters are virtuous, there's nothing that can prevent you from coming into the presence of the Lord and seeing angels. This was on the heels of him teaching them about healing, laying on hands and healing by faith. And meaning, he wasn't saying, you sisters are naturally inclined to virtue. You sisters are naturally ready for the presence of the Lord. He said, you have to go through the work just like everybody else. So the definition of righteousness, I don't know that, I would like to know his definition of righteousness. Righteousness in the scriptures, you just don't speak.
You're part of a harem.
You just clean the floor and you close your mouth. Is righteousness that? Is it happily embracing the principle? Does that make you righteous in and of itself? Which that's what Heber Kimball would say. If you don't fight against the principle, you're fine. Just don't fight against me or the principle, we're good. Or is righteousness something that occurs in your heart? Something that occurs in what you think, what you feel, and what you do toward others. That you behave in a manner that is in the likeness of God. This is not that.
No. Can I just point out one more thing? Polygamy causes a systemic problem, which is you have too many men, too many males. and you need to get rid of them. So we have the lost boys. We have, and that is a continuing thing that happens with people, among people who have polygamy in their hearts. They get rid of their sons, right? They kick them out. They leave. This is the modern version of that. This is the modern version of getting rid of the surplus men. We demean them, we shame them, we say that they're not worthy, and we get rid of them so that the self-righteous can get all of the women that those other men should be marrying. It is an evil, evil idea that completely denies the atonement of Jesus Christ.
That guy who had a wife that Brigham said, I have higher keys. Is that what he was thinking as well? He's right. He's God and I'm nobody. Is that what?
Well, I don't. Yeah, I think Jacobs. I mean, there are so many.
Henry Jacobs.
Henry. I think
Absolutely.
that might be who you're talking about.
Yeah.
I think that this is a common thing, and I have seen it with in this modern time. But do you know how easy it is to? How many Mormon boys grew up in utter shame and self-loathing and hopelessness, right? Men do have. I don't know, because women too, but I think maybe men do have a harder time with sexual appetites. It's just how we're made, right? And to instead of recognize the godly gift that is and the ways that God wants us to utilize it and the power of the atonement as each of us tries to walk forward, we instead pathologize it. And like there is so much shame that allows this horrible idea to be taught. All of us are stumbling mortals doing our best to say, God, what next? What do you want me to work on now? Each of us has as much need to do that as everyone else, and all of us purely needs the atonement. So this is actually a diabolical idea.
It's empirically true that men commit more violent crime. There are hardly any serial killers or women.
Right. Men
are in that category. But that's why I say it depends on what your version of righteousness is. In the telestial kingdom or in hell, we're told in D&C 76 the list of people that are there. And there's a long list of people, which includes murderers and adulterers and thieves and liars, but it also includes people who they idolize other people. They follow men. It includes people who aren't faithful and valiant in the testimony of Jesus. And so it's not merely the basest of all sinners, it's also people who harbor jealousy and anger and resentment and bitterness in their hearts. Can women be just as guilty of that as men? Maybe not the grosser crimes. Absolutely. Men are far more guilty of those things.
Well, I think it's useful to recognize how populations work, right? Women tend to have to conglomerate more towards the middle on almost every measure. IQ, like crime, all of those things. The extremes on both ends tend to be the men, right? And the women tend to be more centralized. So I mean, I hate to get into these topics because it's just so sexist, like there's such a risk. But really, the lowest IQs tend to be men as a whole. Like if you look at the lowest 5%, most of them will be male. Mm-hmm. If you look at the highest 5%, most of them will be male. That's true of, like, most of the violent crimes are committed by males. Most of the amazing civilizational advancements are accomplished by males, right? That's so while that side is there, this side is there. And what they're trying to do is say, I'm here. I'm in this little category. So I get all of this group of women, right? Anyway, I think that isn't even the point so much as the atonement is the point, and repentance is the point, and this denies
all
that
of us
doctrine.
need that equally.
All of us need that, wherever we fall on the curve. Yeah, I think there is zero room in our, I hope we never again will talk about there are more righteous women than men. It is a diabolical idea.
Okay, so this next clip, claim number 7 that Morgan makes to justify polygamy, is one I've never heard anyone ever use before. He basically says that Mother Mary followed the law of many husbands. And so he uses that as his reasoning for why polygamy is okay. Let's take a listen.
So, where can you find an actual example, undeniable example, of a person married to more than one person in Scripture, besides the Old Testament?
What you mean? Not in the Old Testament, but other Scripture?
Yeah.
Well,
That
besides
even
what
the whole Christian world can't deny.
Abraham? Joseph Smith?
No, so you're talking about the New
Oh, that's
Testament.
Old Testament.
You mean after the Old Testament?
Mary, the mother of Christ, is married to who?
Joseph.
And
Heavenly Father.
right. So Mary is living the law of many husbands.
Okay,
The law of many
I
husbands.
saw where you
I didn't know that
reacted.
was a law.
Apparently so.
Wow.
First of all, he said, where is there an undeniable example? Insinuating all the rest of them are easily deniable. Is that what
Yes.
you were thinking?
Well, one thing I was thinking, and I've wanted to mention it this whole time, his style, aside from being painful, is another manipulation tactic.
Mm-hmm.
This like bad attempt at the Socratic method to try to like get them to like, look, you don't know anything. I have to tell you the answers with these. Do you know what I mean? It's so.
He's just leaving it.
Yeah, and anyway, it's really, really disgusting. But you're exactly right. Like no one can deny, and yes, we can. Yes, we
We
can.
haven't heard.
The law of many
Has anyone ever
husbands.
said this to you? Well, this is an example of polygamy, and there's a law of many husbands.
Please, Morgan, can I have the chapter and verse? That'd be great. Can you tell me where in Scripture the law of many husbands
Well,
is
I
found?
looked it up, and I think I found where he's getting that from our good friend Orson Pratt. Let me see it. And I will read this for you. He says, the fleshly body of Jesus required a mother as well as a father. Therefore, the father and mother of Jesus, according to the flesh, must have been associated together in the capacity of husband and wife. Hence, the Virgin Mary must have been, for the time being, the lawful wife of God the Father. He could not have impregnated her unless they were married. We use the term lawful wife because it would be blasphemous in the highest degree to say that he overshadowed her or begat the Savior unlawfully. It would have been unlawful for any man to have interfered with Mary, who was already espoused to Joseph, for such a heinous crime would have subjected both the guilty parties to death, according to the law of Moses. But God, having created all men and women, had the most perfect right to do with his own creation according to his holy will and pleasure. He had a lawful right to overshadow the Virgin Mary in the capacity of a husband and beget a son, although she was espoused to another. For the law which he gave to govern men and women was not intended to govern himself or to prescribe rules for his own conduct. It was also lawful in him, after having thus dealt with Mary, to give her to Joseph, her espoused husband. Whether God the Father gave Mary to Joseph for time only or for time and eternity, we are not informed. Inasmuch as God was the first husband to her, it may be that he only gave her to be the wife of Joseph while in this mortal state, that he intended after the resurrection to again take her as one of his own wives to raise up immortal spirits in eternity. I don't think he's saying what Morgan is saying. He said God was her husband, then he divorced her, then she married Joseph, and then
He's
that
gonna
was
get her
only
back.
for mortality, and he'll get her back. Because there's no way he's like, I'm not going to be the guy that says women could have more than one husband.
This is where the idea of the placekeeper husband comes from that all these women cling to.
Zina Huntington.
Right, but also women today. There are a lot of
today.
women today that are just putting up with their husbands until they
Because they'll be given a righteous
they'll be given
husband in the eternity.
a better
Well,
version.
this is where the idea
And-
of nuns marrying Jesus.
Yeah.
I mean, you know.
But I have to say, this doctrine, Brigham Young taught it, Bruce McConkie taught it, and it's still in our Deseret book guides to the scriptures
Joseph
today.
Smith also?
The
Yes.
doctrine that Heavenly Father had relations
I
with Mary.
think this needs to be added as another false Brigham doctrine, and I call it divine incest.
Okay.
Because that is what we have. God the Father had the right to do with whatever he wanted to with his creation. That is, again, diabolical. Tell that to Warren Jeffs. Oh, you don't need to. He already got the message, right? That is exactly what we are talking about. And how he talks about it reminds me of I think it's called Prima Noctis in Scotland, the rite of the first night where the Lord could deflower every virgin before her wedding night. That's what he's making it sound like. Like he had the right to do as he saw fit with this little virgin, and then he could give her to Joseph. It is Like the reason incest is not okay is because of the power imbalance. That's the reason it's a problem. I mean, there are lots of reasons, but that's the primary one, right? You have, like when Bruce R. McConkie talks about this, he elevates God, like he talks about the greatness and the grandeur of God and how he condescended. They use that to
this little girl.
He condescended to come into the mortal sphere to physically impregnate Mary. Again, diabolical, and the shadows of it are seen throughout polygamy. There are so many problems with
Now,
young
I didn't
girls.
include it in the clip, but he goes on to say, hey, if God told me that I needed to let my wife have multiple husbands, I would be happy to do it. And I would go find all these husbands for
999.
999.
While he plays video games.
I would do my best. Now, when you guys watched that, did you feel that was sincere?
No.
Oh, it was perfectly out of Brigham's playbook, completely. I'll stand here and say how I don't care at all who's in charge of the church. I don't care who has power. My wives could take every money, just every cent, just leave me with the suit of clothes on my back, right? Like, talk is so cheap, right? Like, I'll future fake, I'll promise you anything. And he did say, I would gladly get her 99 husbands, because I'd sit and play video games. I'm sorry, like, that is not what the lowest wives got to do. The lower you are in the totem pole, the harder you work, the more you are enslaved, the less privilege you have. Morgan, who's going to cook your meals, pay for your home, buy your video games that happen to exist in the celestial kingdom? What is this? And you have no, like he exposes himself all the time, that he is arrogant and doesn't have any understanding.
I wished whoever they consider the leader that could say, you're going to do polygamy, came out and made a mistake and said, men, it's the women. They're going to have more husbands now. Just for a moment that they could really feel what it would be like to see how they react. Because I doubt he's going to be like, yay, okay. He'd be like, what?
And if you actually challenged him on it, he'd immediately turn around and say, wait, men can impregnate. He, in other meetings, has used sperm count as one of his defenses to justify polygamy. Right? Women only have one egg at a time. Men have thousands of sperm. It's a shame to let them go to waste. Right? So I know that he's saying it. He wouldn't even buy it for a second.
Well, to me, I find it actually very offensive to demean the birth of Christ and Mary to this level.
Joseph never taught on that subject. I think we ought to stick with what Joseph taught on the subject and not what Orson and Brigham opined on the subject, which is frankly disgusting. The problem with this kind of nonsense, because it is nonsense, Morgan, it's nonsense. If you study the history of Mormon polygamy, and I know Brian Hales wants to call it celestial plural marriage, but they always called it polygamy, plurality of wives, and they themselves called it spiritual wifery. It was all one thing to them. It was an evolutionary practice. It had all kinds of facets that changed over time, and one of those things was in the winter quarters era, they started teaching that all Gentile marriages, they were teaching this openly, all Gentile marriages were null and void. Mm-hmm. All former marriages, and this is, by the way, what a sect called the Cochranites taught. They taught that all previous marriages were no longer valid. And so Jacob Cochran, the one who had the sole authority to do so, could rearrange the marriages. Just so happens that the Mormons came in contact with those people in 1832, baptized a bunch of them. Brigham Young and the apostles were amongst them for years, preaching and doing conferences, etc. Brigham Young marries a woman who, whether she's one of them or associated with them, she's in that area, a woman named Augusta Adams Cobb, who happens to be married with 7 children. His first 2 plural wives are married women. Why is this? And he will have sex with married women and father children with them. Why can they do this? Because they say, and this goes along kind of with this, it's just a fluid thing, that it doesn't matter if you're married because God didn't do that one. That was a Gentile marriage. So it has no force in the eternities. Therefore, as far as God's concerned, you're single, therefore I can take you. That's why Parley Pratt was murdered, because he decided to do that with a woman whose husband didn't like it and he killed him. And so those teachings of fluidity of marriage, it became more concrete over time. They kind of got rid of the polyandry side, meaning a woman with multiple husbands. Okay, but verifiably Brigham Young, Heber Kimball. Heber Kimball's first plural wife, Sarah Peak Noon, was married to an elder in the church who did not apostatize. He was in Nauvoo at the time, and I think serving a mission, I believe. He served a mission, and Heber took his wife to himself. These men did those things, and they blew up the whole concept of marriage, and it had no boundaries. According to John D. Lee, they actually swapped wives in 1845. They said, you here and you here, you can swap the wives.
The ex-Mormon community calls it swinging today. That's pretty much
And
what
that's
it
what
was.
he sounds
and they
like.
didn't get rid of it because the trading up doctrine that Brigham Young taught later in his career was that same very idea. It is, again, the perfect way to completely blow up, to mock what God has established. So their idea of eternal marriage is nonsense. It's complete nonsense. And so, yeah. Anyway, it's can we just agree on one fact? The virgin birth. The virgin birth is a pretty big deal. And no matter how you try to explain it away, it means that Mary was a virgin, right? And the Spirit of God came upon her, and right? Why are we teaching that God, who has a body, had physical sex with Mary? That undermines the entire idea of the virgin birth and is despicable and gives license to the most deplorable behaviors.
And it does not come from Joseph.
No.
That comes from Brigham and Orson and Heber.
Right. Yes.
And Bruce R. McCullough.
And Morgan.
And Morgan.
Yeah. It's really bad.
At the very end of it, he makes some comment that God doesn't need to obey the same laws
I
we
know.
do.
Right. And what does that tell them about their view of themselves as gods?
Right.
Joseph Smith in the Lectures on Faith defines who and what God is and in what laws he abides by.
Right. And if God breaks the laws, God ceases to be God.
Yeah, God
Right?
can't be a liar. He ceases to be God. God's the same yesterday, today, and forever.
Yeah.
Therefore, there is no different definition of adultery in the celestial kingdom.
He's not going to give commandments to his children that he's not willing to also
God
obey.
is not a hypocrite.
No.
Not only did they turn Joseph to a hypocrite, they turned God to a hypocrite.
And the
Can
whole
we think
thing
about
was
that?
just so offensive.
Yeah.
It was just so offensive
appalling.
about God in general.
Okay, this next clip is probably the most intense of the entire 10 claims that Morgan makes. And this is the one where the panel probably gets the most heated in their response. And this is where Morgan brings up something called the doctrine of the helpmeet of Eve. So he just talked about the doctrine of many husbands, and now it's the doctrine of the helpmeet of Eve. And he uses this to explain why Emma failed her Abrahamic test.
He says, the office of your calling shall be for comfort. This is the doctrine of the helpmeet of Eve, which puts her in a savior role.
You know, the doctrine of the helpmeet of Eve.
Because
It's like everyone's very,
Right.
I learned that in primary, right? Anyway.
Right. Everything he's labeling doctrine. Okay, Morgan, what other doctrines do you have?
Okay.
And thou shalt go with him at the time of his going. And then he says, lay aside the things of this world. Now, the moment that she finds out, she struggles with it, right? She tries. She gets to a point where she can't take it anymore, and Hiram has to intervene and do a mediation between Joseph and Emma because Emma is ticked. And so
She wants to kill him.
guess what she says? She says, okay, fine, I'll go with it if I get a house and a plot of land. And a plot letter.
Can you pause it there?
Thank you, William Clayton.
What is he talking about? Like, he's William Claytoning William Clayton.
Yeah.
Like, it's BS built on BS.
There was no request for the house.
A house and a plot of land, and Hiram had to be the intermediary.
And then do you hear the guy in the background? Yeah, like
she wanted
tried
to kill him,
him.
we'll get to that.
Oh.
I just want to say, again, just like his romanticism and Victorianism, and he's telling our church history according to Morgan Philpot, he's come up with how many doctrines now that he's labeled? And now he's just waxing eloquent in this know-it-all way. I mean, it reminds me of when I was in high school and there would be those kids in your AP English class that really wanted to have a good vocabulary, so they kept trying to use huge words that they never could pronounce correctly or use in the right context. That's the vibe. I'm like, I'm so smart, because no one here can actually listen to what, and I'm speaking to an audience of 4 who know less than I do. It's appalling to me. Emma, even according to William Clayton, Emma never demanded a house and a plot of land at all. We have William Clayton claiming in very jumbled references that do not follow the storyline at all, that Joseph had him write a deed for all of the unencumbered lots. Then later on that Joseph had him write a deed for over 60 lots plus the Maid of Iowa. None of this happened. Like, watch my deeds episodes. And Emma never made these demands. Ever. So anyway, even if, like I would like to even know what he thinks, because even the storyline he's following, he's getting it completely wrong.
Right. But he's also skipping over the most important part in this revelation to Emma. He's going straight to her calling is to be a comfort to Joseph, and misses the whole beginning where God calls her an elect lady.
And what did the Lord say to her? And then Joseph gets killed. Now, I would argue that Emma goes into probably, what do you call that? Nervous breakdown. Yeah. She's lost all her kids. She put all this faith. She followed her husband. She supported him, and then he's killed.
Wait, what are all the kids?
Will you pause it?
What are all the kids she lost?
She lost all of them.
She lost, and you know what? I am sorry. Like, I have to swear. I won't. This guy. Choose whatever appropriate swear word you want. I guess I am sensitive to this one because you are using her losses to undermine her, to say that nothing she says matters. She can't, we can just write her off as a mourning, grieving mother, right? And therefore, she had a nervous breakdown. Of course she did. Look how horrible it was. So we can completely say anything we want to about her and not take her seriously at all. So you use this amazing woman's losses to undermine her and to condescend her. Could you be worse than that? It is appalling to me.
The more that you read about Emma Smith from the time in which she lived, the more you read from people who knew her, other than the people who went to Utah. That's another story. The reason why people talk about Emma in the terms they do is because of stories that were told later. If all you have to do is read what Lucy Mack said of her. This woman, she says that perhaps there was never a woman who went through more than Emma Smith did. Losing 6 children, losing a husband, having to be moved from home to home to home.
Often without a home.
There's a possibility that she was abused during the mobbings, that she was injured and or possibly other things. Joseph alludes to that she had suffered serious harms. And when you hear her talk to the Relief Society and the nobility of her soul, her intelligence, when you see her interact in her doings in Nauvoo, and then when she loses Joseph, she goes and marries a man who cheats on her, and then he has a baby with his lover, and she takes that child in, and she raises that child. This is a woman.
And then she brings the mother in and hires her to live in her home. And again, people use that to undermine her, to say she finally learned her lesson. She finally learned to live with polygamy, which again it infuriates me. That reveals Emma to you. It doesn't tell what woman that's been cheated on, then later on in her life when she's cheated on reacts that way, especially when she was this like harpy, jealous, whatever we paint her as, which I'm sorry, if your husband is perpetually cheating on you, you're the one to blame for that? Well, according to Doctrine and Covenants 132, yes, you are. But we get there, I mean, you don't turn into this person. That is the person you always were.
I would challenge everybody to read what William Clayton said, Brigham Young said, Emily Partridge said, and then go read Emma's sermons to the Relief Society. Go read Emma and Joseph's letters. Mm-hmm. Go read what Lucy Mack said about her.
And all of the neighbors, everyone that ever knew them.
There is nothing during Emma's lifetime, nothing during her lifetime, especially in the Nauvoo period when all of this is about, that can corroborate the later stories. They say the most atrocious things. Brigham Young accuses her of trying to kill her own husband twice
we'll
by
get to that.
poisoning.
Yeah.
The slanders are insane, and it starts with William Clayton. We don't have time to go into it at all, but William Clayton is not a credible witness, period. And people who believe that he is, they don't either understand William Clayton, they don't know him at all, they don't understand what he did, and why he's unreliable, why his journals are not contemporaneous. And that's where we get some of these stories, because we have some hints of interactions. But the major stories come later on, and then those are perpetuated by the people who hated her because she was the most ardent opponent of what they were doing.
It's because she wouldn't be controlled.
That's right.
We would have carried her on a pillow if she would have come with us. If Emma would have gotten in line, they wouldn't have hated her. The worst thing a woman can do in polygamy is disobey.
She also
right?
kept things that they wanted desperately.
Right, that was part of not getting in line. But the Joseph Smith
translation of the Bible, yeah, she wouldn't give up. Yep.
Emma's, if you read those sources, even just the letters between Joseph and Emma, to see who this woman was, her intelligence, her wit, her good spirit, her clarity, her sense in she was remarkable.
Far more intelligent than Joseph. Far more intelligent and well-spoken than Joseph. She was much more eloquent, a much better writer. Joseph was not her equal in raw intelligence.
And if you look at what she what she lost, really look at that and consider it, and she never lost her testimony to the end of her life. She believed I believe she had her own powerful experiences with the Lord, because that's the only way to explain it, and there's a lot of evidence for that, right? And so you look at this woman throughout time, and so polygamists turn Joseph into a hypocrite, into a betrayer, right? Mm-hmm. Turn God into a hypocrite, an adulterer, and turn Emma
into a psychopath,
murderer,
lunatic.
all of this, right? That is what they have to do to preserve this doctrine. So it's like you look at who polygamists accuse, and that's who you know you should respect.
So this next clip is probably one of the most important points made in this whole discussion. Many Brighamites blame Emma for the death of Joseph because she wrote that letter to tell him to come back, and that's what made him go to Carthage. And wait until you see what Michelle discovered about that.
And arguably, she's being blamed in some part for his death because of the statement he makes, if my life is of no value to my family and friends, it is of no value to me. Because Emma's the one telling him to come back.
Can you pause it again?
Didn't say family.
If my life is of no value to my family and friends, it is of no value to me. Even with, again, he's falsifying a falsehood. He's falsifying a falsehood. Yeah. So I want to just, can we talk about this a little bit? So this statement, I was curious about it, because what was the term you used at the very beginning? How we hear things again and again and we think they're true. This is one of those, right? That Joseph said.
The illusory truth effect.
Yes, this is another illusory truth effect, because we just hear this, right? And so I want to share this document. The first place you can find this is in the draft history of the church. Anyone who's familiar with the October 5th journal entry knows exactly what we are talking about, right? This is where they edited the history. This portion of it was worked on rather late. Let me see. This is from volume F. So this was well into the Utah period, as late as 1856 is when that was being worked on. And yes, I think that is when it was being worked on. So they were coming up with this. It doesn't cite any original documents. And you can see that they wrote two different versions of it, one that was crossed out and then another one that was kept. So I want to just read the crossed out version, if that's okay. This is starting through a portion. About 11 a.m., Emma sent over, so this is after Joseph and Hiram and William Clayton, according to the story, because like we were just talking about, we don't know how much of this is valid, because I haven't dug into it yet. So I don't know if the whole thing was made up, that they crossed the river and tried to leave, or, I need to find more sources.
So just before the martyrdom, so the end the expositor's been destroyed, and then Joseph and Hiram's lives
are being threatened. They're under
so
arrest.
they escape across the Mississippi.
Is
this
the story we have. So this is
today.
June 23rd. Yep, when they are contemplating leaving. So about 11 a.m., Emma sent over Wasson, Lorenzo D. Wasson. Okay, thank you, and Hiram Kimball to entreat of Joseph and Hiram to come back to Nauvoo and give themselves up for trial, and to inform them what the governor intended to do in case they did not deliver themselves up. That's from Stout. They mark that they got that from Hosea Stout, who is the source for this. And then W. Phelps says about noon he went to the, let's see, I want to skip down to where I want to read. In went to the house of William Jordan where Joseph, Hiram, and D. Richards were. So this is, they send W. Phelps and Captain John Killian and some others to where Joseph, Hiram, and Richards were. And he told them that Emma refused to go, but that Hiram's wife and the doctor's wife agreed to follow counsel. When was this written? Let me ask you, when do we hear all about follow counsel, right? That is a Utah polygamist term. So they are claiming that they wanted to leave, and that Hiram's wife, Mary, because she came west, right? And Willard Richards' wife, because she came west, that they were willing to go, but Emma said she wouldn't go. So this is the first way the first narrative they came up with to blame Emma for the martyrdom. She refused to follow counsel. She wouldn't go west. Directly afterwards, Reynolds Cahoon and O.P. Rockwell came in, and Cahoon commenced interceding. It's hard to read because they edited this. This is the part that's been cut out. Interceding with Hiram for them to come back to Nauvoo, and stuck to it until he persuaded them to do so. And then it goes on from there. Let's see. He agreed to use his influence to fetch them back. They went and informed Emma, who requested them to go to Joseph and Hiram and say that unless they returned and went to Carthage, Nauvoo would be burnt up and the people massacred. And it goes on from there. So this was their first version. Right? That's crossed out. And then we get another version that was included in the history. Again, this is the only place we have it. Part of it comes from Hosea Stout. We can talk another time about Hosea Stout. Not a credible source. Right? Bad dude. Anyway, and it goes on. This is the new one. At 1 o'clock p.m., so they've had to change the time already, Emma sent over O.P. Rockwell requesting him to entreat of Joseph to come back. Reynolds Cahoon accompanied him with a letter which Emma, so now there's a letter, with a letter which Emma had written to the same effect. Does anyone want to ask if we have that letter?
We do not.
And she insisted that Cahoon should persuade Joseph to come back and give himself up. When they went over, they found Joseph, Hiram, and Willard in a room by themselves, having flour and other provisions on the floor ready for packing. Reynolds Cahoon informed Joseph that what the troops intended to do, and urged upon him to give himself up. This is the part that was included in the history, that wasn't edited out. Inasmuch as the governor had pledged his faith and the faith of the state to protect him while he underwent the legal process. Anyway, it goes on from there until it goes down till it has this part where Joseph asks Rockwell, and says, "You're the oldest, what should we do?" And then Joseph asks Hiram, Rockwell says, "You're the oldest, you tell us." Then Joseph asks Hiram, "You're the oldest, tell us what to do," right? And this is where it has him say, "If my life is of no value to my friends, it is of no value to me," right? So we blame this on Emma, but he only says friends. He has to add family. Now, this is what's interesting. So first of all, know that this is not any more valid than any of the other edited history that has absolutely no support behind it. And seeing that they wrote two different versions of it, I think it validates it even further. Should make it pretty obvious. But it gets even better because we have the letter, this letter we do have, that Joseph wrote to the governor. And he says, His Excellency Thomas Ford, "Sir, I wrote you a long communication at 12 last night expressing of my views of Your Excellency's communication of yesterday. I thought your letter rather severe, but one of my friends has just come to me with an explanation from the captain of your posse, which softened the subject matter of your communication and gives us greater assurances of protection, and that Your Excellency has succeeded in bringing in subjection," I've got to turn the page, "bringing into subjection the spirit which surrounded Your Excellency to some extent." So he goes on. So he tells us very clearly why he decided to give himself up, according to his letter. He didn't say anything about "my wife wants me dead," right? It's that he got better assurances from the governor and dared to believe that maybe he would have a free trial. At least that's what the actual documentation tells us. And from my experience dealing with all of these sources, we should go with the actual documented source, not the later altered, forged, fraudulent, made-up histories.
People have to understand what Joseph's doing from really from Missouri on. He's constantly being drug into court. He's constantly being arrested on various things, especially because of John Bennett. John Bennett went to Governor Boggs, who had an assassination attempt on his life. This is in 1842. And from that point forward, there's a posse in town trying to arrest him. So he's hiding out for weeks at a time. And that continues until he dies. During the 1844 period, there are several court actions against him. And he's constantly having to deal with, are they going to kill me? Are they going to, because there were mobs, there were the expositors, and then there was the government. And he was not, I don't believe he was trying to flee. I believe what he's doing is another instance of, I need to not be in a place where they can arrest me so that I'm in danger.
Well, it was just like how they had the Nauvoo city charter, right? They had to intentionally make it so he couldn't be extradited because they knew the goal was only to get him into Missouri so he could be executed. They weren't trying to try him fairly by law, which we saw. When he went to Carthage, he wasn't tried fairly in a court of law. He was assassinated, right? And so that's what he was trying to prevent.
1842, they try to take him to Missouri. That continues all the way through 1843. So he's still trying to keep from being dragged off to Missouri because he believes he'll be killed there.
Well, there's a bounty on his head.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
So we can continue. And there are a couple more things to say, but we'll say them after this next portion.
Have you brought that up in previous episodes before?
About
that letter? And
no, I just found that for you. This brand new.
That's huge.
It's huge. Believe me, there will be a forthcoming episode on it.
This narrative about, this whole narrative needs to be reexamined because this now ties into 1866 when Brigham will say Joseph lost the spirit. The whole idea that Joseph lost the spirit. Why? Because he obeyed his wife.
He hearkened to his wife.
Took his garments off. And I wouldn't have done that.
Right.
Brigham wouldn't have done that. I would have followed the Spirit, and I'd still be leading you today. Or Joseph would still be leading us today had he not lost the Spirit and followed his wife. So I think this is all tied together. I think they're telling themselves these stories in the 1850s, trying to make sense of it all or trying to create the narrative.
Trying to craft the narrative. And you can see having this opportunity to see them crafting the narrative is a big deal.
I don't believe Joseph and Hiram were running it all.
I don't either.
Well, and part of it is the saints knew things. So the saints are asking, why are you guys practicing polygamy? Joseph taught against it. Why are you doing this? And so a lot of this narrative is coming out to convince the saints that they didn't know that the insiders knew.
That's
right? So
it's a careful dance. Also, sorry, I'm kind of changing.
No, you're right.
It's a careful dance that Brigham is doing between elevating Joseph and demeaning Joseph. He has to use Joseph's mantle. So he has to elevate him in that way, but he's constantly demeaning him because he hates having to use his mantle.
Joseph gave you some, but I have the ability to lead you to the celestial kingdom.
From the very beginning, that
Joseph
was 1845.
gave you some of the temple, but I can arrange it.
Right.
Joseph, he lost the spirit. I never would have.
Right.
He kiss, slap with everyone except for Emma. He's just slap with Emma. But with Hiram, it's kiss, slap as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Continue? Let's see what we got.
Me. Because Emma's the one telling him to come back. And so Brigham is pretty hard on Emma. So is the church. The westward saints, Emma doesn't follow, and they don't like her. And so it's so hard to even have a conversation about that when the kind of hinge point of the thing is a woman who gave everything and they lost it at the end, but you're like, of course she did. Of course. And what an Abrahamic test.
All right.
Oh my gosh, I need more swear words. Okay, can I go?
She passed her Abrahamic test.
Okay, can I just say, Abrahamic test is not a thing. No other religion other than Mormonism uses that terminology, and we only came up with it because of polygamy. That is it's crazy sauce. It's crazy town that we talk about this.
With one exception, and that's the Doctrine and Covenants. My people must be tried as Abraham, or they cannot be sanctified. That's the idea.
But that's still not the Abrahamic test that comes into 132.
Correct.
Right? And I don't think the tried as Abraham is talking about Isaac, because I don't even know that Abraham got that right. God at the end showed up. Well, I'll acknowledge there was a ram in the thicket.
Yeah.
Abraham didn't kill Isaac. It would have been Isaac who really had the big sacrifice, right? Mm-hmm. But the ram showed up. So we use this story in this fraudulent way to say, I'm sorry you have to suffer so horribly. There's no, people always ask, where's the ram in the thicket for the women, right? The men talk about an Abrahamic test that the women have to undergo, and there's no ram in the thicket.
And it's always polygamy. Why is our test always polygamy?
Right, because that's useful to these men that want that. So I just want to point out how I despise hearing about an Abrahamic test being used in this context. Let's again, can we get rid of 132?
Do men think it's their Abrahamic test to be polygamous?
Yes, because Brigham would have rather had the grave, right?
Heber said the same thing. He wept and wept, and especially when Joseph proposed or told him that God had given Violet to him.
Right. So, it's the same thing. Is this going to hurt me more than it's going to hurt you?
Well,
says the father.
It's the whole story of the angel with the flaming sword had to come and tell Joseph, I'll kill you if you don't enter into it, right? But I love how at the end, we all know Emma lost hers.
Yes. So
and
Emma,
where do we get that from? Where in Scripture? Where in
the elect lady? We get it
Does
from.
it say that Emma lost her calling?
So I'll read just a couple of things from Brigham Young, if that's okay. Well, is that all right?
Absolutely.
Another man we can swear about?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we know that, I mean, how many stories are there of Emma pushing Eliza down the stairs, right? I love the fact that Brian Hales is the one that disproved that. That just makes me happy, right? But like physically impossible. We have so many false psycho Emma stories that just go everywhere, right? But this is Brigham Young. She has made this is October 7th, 1866. She has made her children inherit lies. To my certain knowledge, Emma Smith is one of the most damnedest liars I know of on this earth. Yet there is no good thing I would refuse to do for her if she would only be a righteous woman. Mm-hmm. But she will continue in her wickedness. Not 6 months before the death of Joseph, he called his wife Emma into a secret council. And there he told her, a secret council that Brigham was at, right? And there he told her the truth and called upon her to deny it if she could. He told her that the judgments of God would come upon her forthwith if she did not repent. He told her of the time she undertook to poison him, and he told her that she was a child of hell and literally the most wicked woman on this earth. There was not one more wicked than she. He told, how many times, I have a picture of Brigham as a ventriloquist using Joseph as his dummy. That needs to be everywhere. He told her where she got the poison and how she put it in his cup of coffee. Said you got that poison so-and-so and I drank it, but you could not kill me. When it entered his stomach, he went to the door and threw it off. He spoke to her in the council in a very severe manner, and she never said one word in reply. I have witnessed all of this scene all around. Who can testify of what I am now telling? That I am now telling the truth. Twice she undertook to kill him. That was one of his.
By the way,
Emma
Heber
statements.
stands up and says, I can.
Right. Yes. Which was probably, Heber, that was always going to happen, right? Brigham was sending the message that Heber was going to catch. This is 24th of July, 1869. President Young and George A. Smith occupied most of the time, Unity Home Manufacturer, etc. President Young alluded to Emma Smith's prevailing on Joseph to take off his garments before he went to Carthage. So she intentionally had him, this was when they were teaching the garments are your physical protection thing. Mm-hmm. So she intentionally, and then it goes on. Those are the only two I grabbed.
Well, I think they also had to come up with this story because they've got this story that Willard Richards, right?
Hiram Smith and John Taylor did the same, but Willard Richards, being charged by Joseph never to put them off, would not. For said Joseph, Willard, the day will come when bullets will whistle by you on each side, and men will fall on each side of you, but you shall be preserved. Joseph could predict that about Willard, but not about himself, right? That he'd be the man falling.
Well, but see, because there were people, I can guarantee you, they're hearing the story that Willard's spreading. Because anybody with their right mind is going to say, how is a 300-pound man stand where bullets are volleying around and just get a little nick on his ear while I was wearing my garments. Well, then why did Joseph and Hiram die? Emma convinced them to take them off. Again, wicked Emma.
Yeah, so this idea of turning Emma into this, I cannot, I've said this many times, people know, this is really one of my main reasons.
One of the things that you'll find for those who are watching this, if you're new to the polygamy issue, one of the things you'll find is that the narrative is inextricably intertwined with the stories from later, and they implicitly trust whatever stories they want. And so part of the work, if you're going to investigate this, you have to ask yourself, is Brigham telling the truth in this moment? Is there any corroborating evidence? And time after time after time, there is nothing to corroborate the stories that he tells, or the stories that Heber tells, or the stories that Willard tells.
And usually evidence to contradict it.
That's right.
Often.
Like the poisoning stories.
Yes.
There are two instances of Joseph being poisoned. One his mother writes about, I think, in the 1830s, and another one in Nauvoo. But on that one, Emma administered to him.
She's the one who
She took care of him.
Yep. And so I'm sorry, but really with narcissists.
So you mean administered as in healing blessing, not administering the poison?
Yes.
I'm just making sure.
She was an herbalist. She healed all. She
but I'm just saying because he claimed she administered poison,
Right.
and then he said. So I just want to make sure everyone knows.
Not administered the poison.
Yeah.
Correct.
Right.
Thank you for the correction.
One core rule of narcissists, you have to look at narcissists' accusations as their confessions. I think that stands very true for Brigham Young.
And polygamy breeds a particular type of narcissist.
So not only does Morgan say that Emma failed, but he turns around and says Violet Kimball passed her Abrahamic covenant or her Abrahamic test.
So interestingly, in the history of the church, there is one single record of a woman who seeks an answer from the Lord as to why and gets it. And she won't say why. She just said that what the Lord showed her was wonderful. Now that's a completely different paradigm, right? Here's why I think she could say that, even though I can't understand it.
Is this in the scripture, or is it, you're talking about the...
It's Violet Kimball.
Okay.
And Violet Kimball goes to the Lord and says
Heber,
why.
Heber Kimball's wife.
And she says, the Lord showed me, and it is wonderful. So,
All right, Whitney, take it away.
So this story, interestingly enough, Violet Kimball writes a short little autobiography before she dies. Never mentions this revelation. Never mentions this vision. Then there's a book written in 1877 titled The Women of Mormondom by Edward Tullidge. And he, in that, does biographical sketches of the women in Utah Mormonism, right? He does one on Violet, and it's several pages long, never mentions this vision. And also throughout his book, he talks about the doctrine of plural marriage and all these other women who received testimonies of the truthfulness. Doesn't mention this vision. Wouldn't you think if you're the woman who had this vision, you would write about it? You would make sure it was in everything, right? So it finally comes out after she has passed away. It's written in 1881 in a periodical called The Woman's Exponent, and her daughter Helen Marr Kimball Whitney does like a series, and she calls it the Scenes and Events in Nauvoo or something like that. And so she does like these little snippets that they print them every so often in this. And that's where we get this vision.
20 years after Violet's death.
Right. And so the gist of it is that she says that Violet can tell something's wrong with Heber. Heber's upset, he's not acting himself. She's trying to get him to tell her what's wrong. He won't talk to her. So she goes to the Lord, pleading to know what's going on with her husband. And she's shown a vision. And all it says is she's shown a vision of celestial marriage. And then she's shown a vision of her husband with another woman. So somehow that means that polygamy is wonderful, and she supposedly comes out of that prayer and says, Heber, take another wife and let's enter this. I understand. Well, what was really going on was if any of this is true, and if it's like a family lore or family legend passed on that maybe Helen then later wrote, what it would mean is that Heber's committing adultery. He's with Sarah Noon. He is most likely acting odd and different, and Volate probably did go to the Lord praying to know what was going on. When somebody is shown a vision, it doesn't mean it's from God.
And can we just say these are really, really, really big ifs? Because Helen Mar tells a lot of big tales,
whoppers,
right?
Yeah,
and
she does. She's
what
not
do you
credible.
think Volate would include this? Like, I'm inclined to think that this was part of Helen Mar's. She's so, I'm sorry, she's so trauma bonded that she comes up with a lot of stories and even writes some of them into poetry that are pretty nutty.
Yeah.
What you find in the history with Heber and Volate, the more I look into it, to me, the clearer the picture comes that this starts with Heber, as you discovered. For those who don't know, Whitney discovered something that historians, for some reason, were not able to discover, and that is that in England, January 21st, 1841, Heber's been on his mission for over a year. He has taught William Clayton some stuff that gets William Clayton hanging out with women, and especially Sarah Crooks, and doing all kinds of weird stuff and writing his feelings for Sarah Crooks, and even though he's married to Ruth Moon, and spending so much time with her day after day after day after day, they end up doing some strange things that end up being redacted. Okay, and he has Sarah Crooks wash his feet 8 times. We don't know exactly what's going on, but some really weird things.
Wash his feet and go to bed.
Well, no,
okay.
not William Clayton. He says one time she washed my feet.
Drink a lot of porter.
They drink alcohol late at night up to as late as 2 or 3 in the morning. They get up the next morning, have breakfast, but they're together all the time. He's a missionary, mind you. Now, who taught him? Heber Kimball. William Clayton called Heber Kimball his father in the gospel. Fast forward just a little bit to January 21st, 1841. Heber is spending all kinds of time, alone often, with Ellen Balfour Redmond, a Scottish woman.
Who was a convert that followed him.
She
to
had
help him on his mission.
She was a Scottish woman who was in New York and was baptized.
Groupies.
And then Heber and Wilford, who both knew her, Wilford writes quite a bit about her. They go to England, and she follows them over by the Spirit of the Lord. Somehow in there, she becomes kind of a scribe for both of them, writing letters for both of them.
To their
wives, I know.
And not only that, but on January 14th, 1841.
From my husband, scribed by his.
Well, not just that, but she writes a letter herself. Imagine getting a letter from a woman your husband's been hanging out with
on his mission.
On his
across
mission.
The country.
And in this letter, if you don't know what you're reading, it just sounds like, oh, this is a sweet letter, because she calls her dear sister, and she expresses love for Violet, Volate, however we want, Violet, right? However we want to call it. I've seen it spelled Violet, so I think they called her Violet. Why is this woman writing this letter on January 4th? She's never met Violet.
Yeah.
Well, 7 days later, Heber and her go to bed together. It's written in his journal, and you found it the first time. One of the great things about this work is you found things, and you found things, and I found things. Why can't the historians find these things?
Well, they find them and they leave that out, because there's a book,
Stanley
right,
B. Kimball,
yes,
right?
that wrote, and it's supposed to be everything from Heber's journals, and he leaves that out.
He leaves that out. Well, mind you, it is scratched out with a knife, but you can still read the words. On January 21st, 1841, Heber's not feeling well, conveniently, and Wilford's there, a bunch of people are at the house, Dr. Copeland comes over, Wilford preaches a sermon, then everybody leaves and leaves them alone. Then he writes, Sister Ellen washed my head, or combed my head, we washed our feet and went to bed. Now, if that was Joseph Smith's journal, that would be prima facie evidence of his having committed or been in a spiritual wife or plural marriage type arrangement. Now, why is this woman writing a letter to Violet? I think, this is my speculation, I think Heber is saying, I want you to ingratiate yourself with my wife. I want her to get to know you, because I'm thinking of bringing you into my family. Okay. Then Heber writes her a letter on February 14th, 1841, and she includes a poem that she's written about his wife. This glowing poem about a woman she's never met. My point is, he's preparing Violet to receive what he calls the cause I have embraced. And he will repeat this phrase, the cause I have embraced, or the cause we have embraced. This is not the fullness of the gospel, or the gospel as Joseph preached. This is the principle of plural marriage, the cause I have embraced.
And he says in that letter that he learned it from his convert, Dr. William Copeland.
He taught him incredible things. We don't know exactly what those incredible things were.
Something about that they have to deal with the making of gods in the celestial worlds or something like that.
Well, he said,
Right?
this is
Something
the law
like
that
that.
leads to the celestial worlds. And this cause that I embraced is based on the principles of virtue that all the ancient prophets and apostles before us have lived, so we must live the same. Okay. He has learned spiritual wifery in England. For those who are looking into this and who are trying to make sense of what he is saying, you need to understand, I don't believe Violet ever loved this principle. I think she swallowed it because somehow she believed her husband was somehow telling the truth, and it was horrible for her. You mentioned that letter in 1849. By this time, he's got 30 wives, and he has to apologize to her, but at the same time slap her and say, hey, look, he says. He actually writes, look, and underlines both words. I am doing this because it's the work only I can do. God has given this work to me, and I'm the father of lives, to give life to any woman willing to receive.
What a slut.
It is horrible.
Yeah.
And she has to put up with this until the day that she dies.
The other thing you can see in the letters between Heber and Violet is before he embraces this doctrine of polygamy, the letters are like a normal couple, doings of the day, my mission, whatever. And then all of a sudden it turns into just constant praise about how amazing she is and how God's given him this. It's just flattery. And at one point in one of the letters, she actually kind of calls on it like, I don't know what you're up to with all this flattery. Like she kind of sees it, but it's just
that same grooming.
It's like grooming.
He's
to
constantly
keep
telling her to give his regards and love to other women.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing that's really interesting about these, I don't know quite as much about Violet, but Heber and Marianne, his wife.
Sarah Peak Noon?
No, Brigham.
That's Brigham and Marianne Angel.
Brigham and Marianne Angel is what I'm trying to say. She was a very quiet, weak, abused woman. She'd been abused by her father. She was she wasn't in the Relief Society. She didn't have any voice, right? This was a doctrine that would work for Brigham and his wife, right? And then you can see Heber kind of shoving his wife down and her buying it. Emma wouldn't. Emma was strong. Emma and Joseph were completely equal partners in every possible way. And so anyway, I just find it to be interesting, the contrast between these women that allow and enable this. Emma could have had an easier life if she had gone along with it. They left her with all of the debts in Nauvoo. They killed her children. I shouldn't say they killed her children. That was Lucy, whose children they killed. But so many horrible things happened to Emma as a result of this, right? Because she wouldn't go along with it. And so I think it's really interesting to see how these men interact with their wives.
One more thing on revelation. So you mentioned people can get a, quote, revelation and get a spiritual manifestation and it not be of God. Mm-hmm. So today, I have met a number of women and men who believe in some form of this. Some people call it dyadic partners. My wife knew a man who was teaching this and taught it to her, and tried to make her his dyadic partner.
We even have the day bills. It's like
it's the same, exactly the same thing.
Yeah, it is a dark spirit. And so when people say I'm being ridiculous to say blood atonement comes next, I'm not. Blood atonement comes next.
Yeah.
It depends on how long you follow the spirit.
Joseph said, violence always follows adultery.
Oh, and the Book of Mormon accuses us, right, of our adultery and our murders. It goes together. It's pride.
But a fascinating article written.
once polygamy comes out, they kill them.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's the opposite.
Again, look at a narcissist's accusations as their confessions.
But I would say an excellent article you can find in the Times and Seasons is Joseph wrote Try the Spirits, because they had this same problem. You know, you get a little revelation from heaven and everyone runs around saying it's from God, and we don't do enough to match it to scripture, to talk to other people and say, what do you think? Am I crazy? And we probably should be better off assuming we're crazy and then prove it by scripture than to assume we're special and chosen. Everybody wants to be special and chosen. And they prey on that. They prey. He's grooming people to want to be the special chosen ones.
I think that is like part of the path. When the veil when you come closer to God, the veil thins on both sides. And one of these are the temptations that come so, they're just perfectly matched for people who want to be righteous, because there is this desire to be special, to be chosen, to be right. Yeah. And so that starts whispering to you, just like they do to the women, you are so special, I'm grooming you. It's that same voice.
He's grooming the men just as much as he is the women. Like, we're really focusing on what he's doing to the women here, but he is also, like you mentioned, the guy who starts parroting and sounding like him.
Emily Partridge says something that's really fascinating. And she contradicts herself in all of her testimonies, but in one of them, she says, it's this whole trope that Joseph would say, I've got something I want to tell you. I want to give you a letter. If you'll burn it, She's one of the people who says that. But what she says is that Joseph spoke to me, said, I want to tell you something. I was nervous. Why would you be nervous? He didn't tell you what he was going to tell you. I know. Why are you nervous? Okay. She says and admits in her temple lot testimony, it was whispered about. This spiritual wife was whispered about. She'd already heard about it. Okay. Well, whatever he said, if he said anything at all, he says, I want to tell you something. She says, I was nervous. I didn't even want to talk to him. So she goes away. Then she says, she learns from a Mrs. Durfee. Mrs. Durfee calls her in and says, what did Joseph want to tell you? And she says that Mrs. Durfee taught her and her sister the principle of plural marriage. And then she says, before Joseph ever said a word, she had this dark night of the soul, and she was tormented, and she had to pray in earnest. And then she received a testimony of the principles of what she says, the things Joseph would have said. Okay.
Because according to Mrs. Durfee, who probably told her, I know this is what Joseph would have told you, right?
And in Nauvoo, this whisper stuff was going on everywhere. That's why the Relief Society had to put it down. That's why they had to teach the sisters to not listen to these things.
Yeah, why deny it, right? It's being whispered everywhere. Anyway, yep.
There were a number of people, by the way, who said that the principle was revealed to them before Joseph ever said a word. How is that possible, by the way?
Yeah. So just to finish up, I don't know how he thinks that the late Violet kept her Abrahamic test, because,
she was willing to be a polygamous wife.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. Like, they have turned for every single woman on this planet. That's the only Abrahamic test we're going to get.
You're righteous enough to be in a harem. That is literally what it is.
Well, that's what Brigham would teach, right?
Let your heart die pierced with deep wounds.
Brigham and Hebrew would teach, you guys have to suffer. This is part of your deal.
So this last clip is one of the main reasons why I wanted to put together this panel. You can hear this participant working through in his mind the things that Morgan is reviewing about polygamy. And you can hear his wife, who obviously sounds against it. And he's been trying to talk her into it. And now he's going through his mind that Joseph fought polygamy. Everything he ever said publicly about polygamy was against it. Everything that he wrote in his journal, everything he said privately, he was against polygamy. How do you make sense of that if it's a commandment from God? So now we get to see the response to that.
But it kind of does show a little bit of the righteousness of Joseph, and if you learn about how it all happened, and Brigham, Brigham didn't want to do it, and Joseph fought against it. And almost like if you weren't righteous, maybe you'd accept it. Like if you weren't, maybe some guy on the street, would be like, oh, this sounds great to me. Well, Joseph, they didn't want to. A huge trial. It was a big trial that
Jeremy.
So this goes into stories that are told after Joseph's dead, and different people view this different ways. Some people view that he did it and he was a fallen prophet. Other people view him as a con man. These are the models that you have distilled. He was a con man. He was just kind of making things up as he went along, and he found, hey, I could get a bunch of women if I do this. And then other people believe he was a reluctant prophet who was drugged by the angel at the point of a sword, flaming sword, that is. The problem for them is that they have no evidence for that. What they call evidence are statements decades after the fact, okay? Many decades after the fact, starting primarily in the late 1860s. If you look at Joseph's lifetime, there's zero evidence that can connect him to it. There are only accusations that are never corroborated and are fought against by Joseph Smith. What you don't find is the evidence like you found about Heber Kimball, where there is a journal entry that clearly shows him going to bed with a woman. You don't find letters. You don't find any private or public teachings. You find absolutely nothing from Joseph. What you do find, and what people minimize, I'm putting together a presentation that goes through everything he did from 1827 to 1844. So far I have 500 slides. Because it's enormous, the amount of things day after day after day after day. He had to deal with this from 1841 to 1844 virtually every day. And he was doing something to fight it virtually every day. So this is just a sketch of some of the things. There were 13 trials against men specifically involved in spiritual wifery and polygamy. That included Solomon Freeman in 1837, William Campbell, John C. Bennett, Chauncey Higby, Lyman O. Littlefield, Joel S. Miles, Darwin Chase, Justice Morse, Gustavus Hills, Harrison Sagers, Hiram Brown, and then Harrison Sagers again. Joseph and he was involved in those trials. Okay, he was intimately aware of them, and he actually preferred charges against a couple of them himself. Joseph took court actions on 3 occasions and proposed a 4th against people who said he was practicing spiritual wifery, and he took them to court for slander and libel. Now, what happens if you take somebody to court? That opens you up.
Discovery, that's the word I'm looking for.
I don't know if they called it discovery back then, but it opens up to cross-examination of witnesses, okay?
Yeah.
And when he took Chauncey Higby in 1842. Chauncey Higby was one of John Bennett's cronies, and he had slept with a number of women and was telling the women that Joseph said, I could do this, okay? So he took Chauncey to court for slander and libel against his wife, actually, against Emma, which is interesting. And then he produced witnesses. He filed court dockets and then took sworn affidavits from witnesses, submitted those to the court. Chauncey Higby produced witnesses as well. Those are the witnesses that John Bennett named. Okay, that was Sarah Pratt, that was Nancy Rigdon, Emmeline White, and somebody else. Okay, it never went to trial because Joseph was in hiding from the authorities who were trying to drag him off to Missouri. But that was the first action. So one has to ask, why would a guilty man take anyone to court, especially at this point by mid-1842 when he's got at least 12, 13 wives, when simply all it would take is one disgruntled wife, which Brigham had many and Heber had many, or one uncle or one cousin or one neighbor or one friend who saw him doing X, Y, and Z and would willingly testify, which would have happened. There were plenty of people who made actions against Joseph all throughout his life, including leaders of the church.
William Law actually did sue him, and he was the one that accused him
Of adultery.
He came up with one name which he couldn't verify at all, and was actually
Maria Lawrence.
These ideas are ridiculous.
And so number one, people have to ask, why would he sue someone in open court? Then he sues Orsimus F. Bostwick in January of 1844. Why? Because Orsimus accuses Hiram of practicing spiritual wifery.
It's not even that. It's that there's just pure adultery. He's all of the women in Nauvoo are prostitutes, and he has women everywhere. That's not even it's
food in exchange for sex.
So again, he goes to court over that.
It's not even polygamy or spiritual wifery.
Then he goes to court against Francis Higby and sues him for slander and libel. He testifies against him. This is where we learn all about what happened in 1841 between Francis and John Bennett. Some people think that they were gay lovers. I don't think that's what it was, but that Francis was sleeping with a prostitute, and then John was seducing 6 and 7 women, dragged them before a court of 60 to 70 people. Anyway, they produced testimony against Francis Higbee. Joseph lays the whole thing out bare in court. Then he is sued by William Law and Wilson Law for adultery. Okay, he's brought on charges with Maria Lawrence. Okay, I don't think they named Sarah at this point. This is where we get the idea that he had girls living in the mansion and he was having sex with them because of this lawsuit. Well, Joseph, before he's killed, tells John Taylor to take them to court to countersue for slander and libel on behalf of Maria Lawrence.
Right.
So once again, he puts himself in the crosshairs of cross-examination.
And is it Maria Lawrence whose sister is Sarah? Is it
Yes, Sarah and Maria Lawrence.
And Sarah comes to Salt Lake
And
City
she-
decades later to declare that Joseph that it never happened,
That's right.
that they were never married to him.
That's right.
What happened to believe women? Like the levels and layers of this.
And these are the women that supposedly Emma gave to Joseph. That
Right.
she put their hands
Maria
in his.
died. Maria Lawrence died with never giving any testimony
That's exactly
other than
right.
being involved in the countersuit for libel.
Right.
And then Sarah said, nope, never happened.
So
and stopped
Joseph
saying it.
is excommunicating people left and right. Besides the polygamy cases, there's 10 more adultery cases that are tried. Joseph published against it so many times, I can't list them all. It's in the papers constantly, some message about we only have one wife, we don't practice polygamy. Here's the law of the church. They reprint the law on marriage in section in the D&C 1835. They reprint that I think a half dozen times between the Millennial Star, the Times and Seasons on I think 4 occasions. It's crazy how often they are publishing about these things. And then they also publish many statements by outsiders who will come into town and say, hey, I thought the Mormons were crazy. I thought they had a community of wives, and I thought they had all things in common. I thought they practiced the craziest debauchery, and I found that they had none of these things. They would continually combat the notion that the Mormons had this doctrine, and Joseph was a part of all of that. And then he speaks. One of the things people don't understand is that he spoke often publicly about it, and some of those things, we don't have those sermons. So he says in 1842 that when one of the women who came before the Nauvoo High Council testified against John Bennett, basically said, why is Joseph preaching publicly against this? So much, he says, so much against it. The reason why those women came before the council in the first place was because Joseph preached a public sermon to the Nauvoo choir and taught against what was going on. Remember, he had encountered Francis and Chauncey Higbee doing crazy stuff in 1841. So he starts trying to figure out, okay, how do I deal with this? These guys are seducing all these women, but I want to do this privately. And so he tries to take care of it privately. It gets worse and worse and worse. And he's preaching against this all throughout 1841, finally preaches to the Nauvoo choir. That sets women ablaze with guilt, and they come forward and they testify in the council. And then all of the John Bennett stuff follows. The John Bennett stuff is absolutely insane. It's virtually every single day in the journals that he's dealing with John Bennett in a public and a private action to try and teach people, I don't do this. I don't do this. I am not guilty of this.
It is just heartbreaking.
Now,
It's heartbreaking.
Where Brian Hales, like a slippery eel, sorry, Lord, but like a slippery eel, the way he gets out of it is by saying, first of all, they were carefully worded denials. And second of all, he was decrying John Bennett's spiritual wifery, not celestial plural marriage. There is not one instance of celestial plural marriage ever in the record during Joseph's lifetime.
Can we point out, Morgan Philpot said 3 separate times at least, God never uses the word polygamy. Right. Polygamy is not a thing. God, as if, well, the polygamists absolutely use the word polygamy constantly. Search the Journal of Discourses for polygamy. You'll get a lot of hits, right? And then anyway, and then they come up with these ridiculous, like, show me where Joseph ever gave any wiggle room. Just the term celestial plural marriage hadn't been invented yet, so he didn't use that. But if he had, they would have come up with some other goofy term.
So Joseph is publicly preaching against this with sermons we don't have. And by the way, James Whitehead, who was one of his secretaries, would later say, I gave a bunch of Joseph's papers to Brigham Young. I was in charge of his personal journals and his letter books. And so there's possible there were things written down that we just don't have. Well, he also taught the Relief Society against spiritual wifery. He began the authorship of The Voice of Innocence with William Phelps. He started that letter and then turned it over to Emma. She did the final touches, and then she preached it publicly with him on the stand four separate times, I believe it was. In January of 1844, William Law goes before the High Council, and he says he's brought there because of some kerfuffle between Joseph and Hiram. The seeds of what will later happen start around this January time frame. He says Joseph, before the High Council, blowed up the notion, blowed it all up, meaning polygamy or spiritual wifery, before the High Council, meaning he destroyed the notion that it was right before the High Council, and Hiram did it before the Elders' Quorum. So it was very publicly known that they were out preaching against this. Then there's a private communication between Joseph and Robert Foster's wife. This is in, I think, April or May of 1844, where he goes to Robert Foster's wife and he says, have I ever said anything about spiritual wifery privately or publicly to you or anybody else? Have I ever acted in an unvirtuous way? And William Clayton, as witness, writes down that she says, no, sir, you have not. Okay. In October 18th, you mentioned the journal entry where he specifically, William Richards writes down that Joseph says there is nobody that can do this. They later changed that. On October 15th says the same thing. And then in 1840, we mentioned the monogamous eternal marriage that was principle that was revealed. Then Hiram speaks against it with Joseph on the stand on the April 8th, 1844. Then Joseph, because of the trials for him against adultery or bringing him into trial because of adultery with Maria Lawrence, gets up on May 26, 1844. This is the famous one that people quote, where somehow this is a carefully worded denial, where he's going on and on about how they're accusing him of spiritual wifery and adultery. And he says, what a thing it is to be accused of having 7 wives when I can only find 1. Okay? And then the June 8th and 10th stuff where he denies that, and that's published in the papers. That is just a sketch. On, and that's nothing that he did before that in the 1830s, when he laid the doctrine for monogamous marriage so clearly in the Book of Mormon, in the Bible, where he did not strengthen polygamy in any way, but made it more off limits, and in the Doctrine and Covenants. So please, can we get rid of the notion that there's any evidence that he did anything other than fight it?
Right. And if we go on after Joseph and Hiram's death, Emma's entire life, Joseph III's entire life, Joseph III was almost 12 years old when his father died. You show me one polygamous man who isn't teaching this highest, holiest doctrine to his son, who's supposed to be the leader after. That would be like it's ludicrous.
The Whitneys were teaching it to their daughter Sarah as a teenager.
Right. And so we're supposed to completely ignore, like, people come to this with the predetermination that everything Joseph said is a lie, everything Hiram said is a lie, everything Emma said is a lie. And these later claims are all true.
And everything Brigham said was true.
Yeah, right. It's and just we've just gone over a smattering of the evidence today that it is all inverted. Again, it's all inverted.
I'm so grateful to Michelle, Whitney, and Jeremy for taking the time to address Morgan's 10 polygamy claims. To conclude, I asked each of them to share their final thoughts with the many people across the country that may have heard Morgan teach these things.
I've reached out to Morgan and to some others in these groups because there is so much that I personally have in common with them. I'm worried about where the world is going. I'm worried about I'm concerned, I don't want to say worried or afraid, but I am concerned that things are going to become increasingly unstable. We're losing our freedoms. I think we have a lot in common along those lines. What I think they are seeking is divine protection, ultimately. We want to establish a community that will be protected in these last days. What they are failing to understand is that the Book of Mormon makes it very clear that if we even embrace these abominations, this abomination to any degree, we are cursed. The land is cursed for our sake, right? We will experience the cursings. That bears out perfectly throughout our early Mormon history.
The Lamanites were preserved because they loved their wives and
Yes.
they did not practice that.
And they followed the commandment that was given to Lehi and every righteous man. I understand the desire to have places of refuge, the desire to want to not be afraid in these crazy times. I'm not sure that's what's motivating everyone, but I do think there's a lot of motivation of we need to preserve our freedoms, right? We will never qualify for God's protection while we are embracing this abomination. And I cannot tell you the difference in feeling for me in my life, my confidence in God now, after I've gone through this journey, after I know God's voice and I know I'm doing what God wants me to be doing. And it does not come with, I have experienced those feelings of you're so special coming from the deceptive voices. I've experienced all of those things, you know. You keep going, you work through them, you put them in your back pocket, right? And you just keep going to follow God, patiently going through the trying processes that the Lord gives us. And you come out on the other side with confidence in God, where you don't need a big guy like this. You don't need the big guy leading you. You know God's voice, you know God's direction, and you know God's protection. So that is my plea, is I know that people want a place of refuge. You will never find it in polygamy. This is not the right organization. And we need to get past this, because we do need to be united to defend our freedoms, to defend righteousness. There is a lot. We agree on so much about the problems in the world. I just want to shout from the rooftops and beg people, please consider these issues, because they have always been so important, but they've never been more important than they are right now.
So false spirits often come in the form of false ideas. They're not necessarily an entity that we would call a spirit. It's the spirit of something. And so false spirits are all around us. This world is wrapped in darkness, in chains of darkness. And it is our job to learn to discern between truth and error. We can best do that when we use the scriptures to be our guide. So the danger with these ideas, like that Michelle's talking about, is we do feel that way. Maybe we feel a pull. Maybe we are feeling starved at church, and the gospel is a huge smorgasbord, and we're just being fed a little cup of milk, and we want to feast on more. So do it with prudence, do it with caution. But the thing that stuck out to me with this is that they look to him as the authority on the interpretation of the scripture. And we mentioned it earlier, there's no pushback. There's no one opening their scriptures and saying, when he says, oh, no one's happy in the gospel, immediately, man is that he might have joy. Or, the scriptures that you quote. I mean, there's just, get into your scriptures. Like, go to your scriptures, challenge everything that people like this, because he's not the only one. There are thousands more like him. God gave us a litmus test in the scriptures, and that is, by their fruits you shall know them. Well, part of their fruits is what comes out of their mouth. Part of it is their behavior. I believe it's how they speak about their wife and their children tells a lot about a person. And so
we have a lot of cases and evidence of that, of how Morgan speaks about.
And so go take all those things, and I know you're starving. I know these people are starving. They want the meat. They want to feast. Be careful where you get your feast from. I know that that's kind of like fingernails on a chalkboard for some people, because the church so much says only authorized sources. There's a little bit of truth in that, but the authorized source is God's standard works, right? And so go to the scriptures, test it out, see if it matches scripture, and don't take somebody else's interpretation of the scripture, because he's interpreted a lot of scripture, but we don't believe he's interpreted it correctly at all. And so just try the spirits, learn how to discern between truth and error, between the bitter and the sweet, and stick with what's in the scriptures as your guide.
First, I think any woman listening to this, with maybe some exceptions, wants to be free of this. I think any man who is in touch with the Spirit of God in him wants to be free of this. And there's a reason for that. Because the Spirit teaches us that this is an abomination. If you will listen to what the Spirit is telling you, you will know that the pattern in Scripture of one man and one woman becoming one flesh, becoming the model or the foundation of Zion, where they're one heart and one mind, and they have all things in common, and there's no poor amongst them, meaning between husband and wife. There's no lack between husband and wife. They're equals. That cannot be accomplished in polygamy, first. Second, there's a model in the Scripture for what's really important for people to repent and turn to God. Ammon and the sons of Mosiah went to the Lamanites, and they had two primary objectives. Once they had gained the trust of the kings, they had to endeavor to first teach them the correct definition of redemption. We've sort of hit on that tonight. What the Book of Mormon, the fullness of the gospel and redemption, it actually has to do with this question. What does it mean to follow the path of the gods? What does it mean to ascend? What does it mean to be redeemed? Well, the Book of Mormon hints at that. That's the first thing they had to teach them. The second thing they had to teach them was the traditions of their fathers, which were not correct. They had to correct their history. And in the Doctrine and Covenants, we learn that the wicked one cometh and taketh away light and truth because of disobedience and the traditions of our fathers, which are not correct. So the wicked one ensnares us by false history. We don't know ourselves unless we know our history. And the things that we have all, I think we've become really close friends because we have found the excitement, the passion, and the joy of learning without the high priests of the historical temple to tell us what to think about it. I call their practice historical malpractice because they don't talk about any of the things that you've talked about, that you've written about, that you've talked about, and that I'm trying to talk about. There's a few of us engaged in this right now. More are coming, and they're perplexed by how many people are actually changing their minds. Why? Because we say, you don't need the experts to tell you what to think if you can read the same things the experts can read. You can do your own homework. And so we must know our history to know ourselves. I don't ask anybody to trust me or believe me. Go do your own homework. We've made a lot of claims today, and we've thrown a lot of stuff out there, and we understand if this is the first time you're coming to this argument, this might sound absolutely nuts, absolutely lunatic, because all you've ever heard is the illusory, what's that term again?
Yeah, that was good.
Is the illusory truth effect.
The illusory truth effect, or what Brett Weinstein calls idea laundering. If enough experts say it, then it must be true. And they just repeat it, recycle it, and launder it until the term comes out clean and everybody believes it. This is what has happened with this notion. It wasn't a foregone conclusion in Joseph's day. There were many people like Mark Twain.
It wasn't a foregone conclusion in Brigham's day.
Or in Brigham's day. And
Everyone knew in Brigham's day that Brigham started it.
And it's only a foregone conclusion now because we've had enough people from Fawn Brodie to John Dehlin who regurgitate the same nonsense over and over and over again without critically examining the history. So first, let's understand there's much more to this story of redemption, eternal marriage, the fullness of the gospel. There's much more to that story, and it has nothing to do with section 132. With a small portion of it. Nothing to do with the plural marriage stuff. And then let's learn our history and let's be sober about it and let's do our own homework.
Look, I've been to Morgan's seminar and I heard all of the things that he talked about, signs of the times and the government's falling apart, and I agreed with a lot of it. Some of it I didn't agree with, and who cares? There's many people with many different opinions. I have no problem with him sharing what he believes about what's coming in the last days. But the stuff he said about polygamy, man, It was more than just a seminar. This affects people's lives. You can tell it from the people that are sitting in the audience and their reasoning. And now you have this husband who probably has a good marriage out thinking about other women. And you can't just say we don't practice polygamy in this wife, and it ends the effect on the wife. Because if you believe if my wife dies that I'm going to get sealed to another woman, now you still give yourself the excuse to look at other women and to lust after them in your heart. And the worst part about believing that polygamy is a true principle and from God is you use God to talk your wife into it. How on earth is Elder Oak's second wife going to say no to him? I don't know why she married him. Maybe she thought he was a great guy, but was there anything in her decision that had to do with he's one of the head apostles and this is like a free ticket to the celestial kingdom? Why on earth would she be okay being relegated as a second wife for any other reason? Why would she want to be married to a man who's thinking about another woman when he's with her? Or to have to compete with this other woman on the other side of the veil. It makes absolutely no sense to do that to your wife. And Morgan, the stuff you're teaching about polygamy is giving permission to the men in your seminars to start lusting after other women. And you're not even giving true points of doctrine. The scriptures that you quote, the new doctrines that you make up, like the doctrine of multiple husbands or the doctrine of the helpmeet of Eve, all of that makes it sound like you know what you're talking about, and people are just going to start believing you. So it would be great if you would stop telling people to be polygamists or giving them that excuse to basically cheat on their wives in their hearts. But if you are going to keep preaching this doctrine, then I hope you are okay with us showing the other side of this. If you're on the fence about this topic, I hope we've given you enough information to consider that there is another side. You don't have to be a polygamist to make it to the celestial kingdom. You don't have to get sealed to another wife. There is plenty of men and plenty of women. No one is not going to have that opportunity if they want to be married. God is not going to force any of his sons to take multiple wives and damage his daughters in that way. That's just not how he works. Yeah, and thanks for taking the time with us. I hope there's been something valuable in this. I look forward to doing the panelist discussion also about work, and anyone else out there who's never been checked or questioned and just saying polygamy is okay, we are going to respond. We're going to show people the other side. We're going to do that as respectfully as we can because we know we're talking about people's sacred beliefs, but people deserve to see both sides. Thanks for watching.